When ABBA's Benny Andersson and Frida divorced, it looked like the band might survive. But considering the demented betrayal Anderson had up his sleeve, it's no wonder they broke up. We'll get more into that story later on. In 1973, international audiences were finally starting to warm up to this new Swedish pop group. But the band had one major problem that was preventing them from breaking out big. Their original names, Bjorn and Benny, Agnetha and Annie Fried, were pretty bulky when put together. Even if people enjoyed the album, how were they ever supposed to remember them with a name that was such a mouthful? Their manager, Stig Anderson, was finally tired of dealing with this issue, so he decided to call them something much simpler: ABBA, which, of course, was an acronym for the names of the band members. But many people don't know that the name they would become known to the world as also had a much more fishy namesake. You see, in Sweden, ABBA was also the name of a well-known packager of canned fish. This might have been a setback long term, but Stig had his eyes on the rest of the world, none of which knew anything about that Swedish fish company. He felt that ABBA was a viable name globally, but before they went international, they still had to deal with the canners. To ensure they were on the right track, they held a competition in the newspaper to settle on a new name for the group. At the end of it all, the summer of 1973 saw the official announcement of ABBA as the official moniker of the band. The Swedish company gave them permission on one condition. They said, as long as you don't make us feel ashamed of what you're doing. As the decade churned on, it became clear that they would do exactly the opposite. Now decked out with a new name that they were sure the world would remember, Stig and the group weren't going to let anything stop them from international stardom. But it wasn't all smooth sailing on the way to the top. When their song Ring Ring failed to capture Sweden's heart in 1973's Melodifestivalen, they were extremely disappointed. I mean, they thought that this was going to be their breakout hit. Unfortunately, it placed third in Melodifestivalen and never even made it to Eurovision. But they didn't let this destroy their hope. After all, the group knew that they had talent. It was just a matter of finding the right ears for their music. They held their breath until 1974, when they went after the elusive Eurovision again. And this time, they decimated the competition. After attempting to break out of Sweden twice already, ABBA came to the 1974 Melodifestivalen with fresh fire. Their tenacity paid off, and the festival selected Waterloo and ABBA for the 1974 Eurovision Song Contest. 2 months later, on April 6, 1974, ABBA charmed Europe for the first time, winning Eurovision with their now iconic song. Their moment had finally arrived, and in the end, they came away with way more than they had ever imagined. Just as they had hoped, Eurovision was their ticket to the rest of the world. Following their win, they released Waterloo as a single. It topped the charts in 9 European countries across the west and north of the continent, including West Germany and the coveted UK. It also topped the charts in South Africa and cracked the top 10 in several other countries like Spain, Australia, France, Canada, and the US. But creating one hit was one thing. Now that they've grabbed fame, they had to find a way to keep it. Even at this point, there were already whispers the group was going to be nothing but a one-hit wonder. And for ABBA, it really looked like their worst fear was coming true. With Waterloo, ABBA got the fame they dreamed about, but like many artists, they really struggled to stay on top. They followed up that song with another now popular single, Honey Honey. While it didn't do as well as Waterloo, it still made a splash in several countries. But in the UK, their label decided to release a remix of Ring Ring instead, which wowed no one. At this point, the whispers of them being a one-hit wonder were starting to become very loud. Attempting to capitalize on their Eurovision success, the band launched their first tour in November of 1974. Unfortunately, where they'd hoped for fanfare, they found even more disappointment. Few of their locations sold out, which forced them to cancel several shows because of lack of sales. Denmark, West Germany, and Austria had no interest in ABBA. For all intents and purposes, it felt like the end of their dream come true. Even worse, the tour came with some major personal sacrifices. Not only did the tour disappoint on numbers, but it also placed additional strain on the band members. Agnetha and Bjorn had just celebrated the birth of their child a year before. And while Frida and Benny did not have any children together, they each had children from previous marriages. It seemingly weighed heavily on them all. But Frida might have suffered the most from the separation from her children. She left them with her father, and later said, "How could I, who cannot even take care of myself during my depression, make any claim to be able to take care of them?" Somehow, though, they all managed to carry on with their tour, and it turned out to be a very good thing they did. Their 1974 European tour had two legs. Despite the lackluster response to the first half of their shows, ABBA forged on into Scandinavia. They were met with all the enthusiasm that their earlier shows lacked. Every venue was sold out. They estimated that their Stockholm show had over 19,000 people in attendance. So why the early struggles? When he looks back on that time following their success at Eurovision, Bjorn has a theory that they lost fans because they lost themselves. He said, "If you look at the singles we released straight after Waterloo, we were trying to be more like the Sweet, a semi-glam rock group, which was stupid because we were always a pop group." With their identity cemented, they forged forward as a wildly successful band. But one place in particular just refused to get on the bandwagon. Although they released a handful of singles throughout 1974 and 1975, ABBA really struggled to make a significant splash within the UK. Closer to home in places like Austria, Sweden, and Germany, they were ranking in the charts, but the UK remained out of reach. That is, until the release of their third album, ABBA, and the single SOS. This marked the start of a truly meteoric rise. While ABBA remained popular across the Western world throughout the late 70s, fans couldn't get enough of them down under. There were few places where they were as popular as they were in Australia. They own this in part to their music videos which aired on the program Countdown. This wasn't by accident. This was all part of their strategy. It had always been a part of the plan of ABBA and their manager Stig to become global stars. This came with limitations though. They couldn't travel easily to faraway places, so they recorded videos and small performances to share across the globe in place of touring. It worked, especially in Australia, where they topped the charts for several years. And yet, even with all their fame, each of the members of the band still struggled with their own personal demons. With the group now thrust into the spotlight, the cracks beneath their shiny demeanors started to show. The dark side of fame reared its ugly head, and there was nothing that any of them could do to stop it. In many ways, it seemed like Agnetha suffered from scrutiny from fans more than the rest of them. With her blonde hair and traditional good looks, she quickly became the pin-up girl of the band, a role that she never asked for and never felt comfortable with. especially in the moments when fans took things a little bit too far. During an Australian tour in 1977, her body became the hottest topic of conversation. At one of the performances, Agnetha wore a tight white jumpsuit. An Australian newspaper wrote the headline, "Agnetha's bottom tops dull show," to which she replied, "Don't they have bottoms in Australia?" There is no telling how that kind of attention truly affected her, but it was far from being the only drawback of celebrity. It was not just Agnetha's looks that caught fire when they were in Australia. Their fame knew no bounds during this period, and while they had many fans, fame doesn't always attract only positive attention. At one time, 200 officers were required to control the crazed crowds in Australia, and as they soon discovered, it nearly wasn't enough. The 1977 Australian tour was full of highs and lows for ABBA. One of their first shows was marked by torrential rain, making the massive crowds even more difficult to control. Things really reached a head near the end of the tour when they had to clear out an entire show for a terrifying reason. The band was set to play the first of a series of shows in Perth, when they received a warning that they just could not ignore. Authorities sent news that there was a danger of an explosive in the building. They hastily evacuated. Luckily, in the end, it turned out to be nothing but a false alarm, and they ended up playing another successful show. But even though they managed to dodge danger more than once, the danger inside the band might have been the bigger threat. You see, touring can be pretty contentious at the best of times, and doing it with your spouse or partner can only make matters more challenging. In ABBA's case, this caused the relationships in the band to deteriorate rapidly. In 1978, Frida and Benny finally tied the knot after a decade of dating, a seemingly very happy ending. But the other couple that made up the group found themselves approaching a very different kind of ending. A year after their bandmate's marriage, Agnetha and Bjorn divorced. At the time, their breakup seemed mutual and friendly. But once Bjorn started dating another woman just a week after they split up, things got a lot more tense. Now that the love was gone, fear began to rise about the fate of ABBA, and very rightfully so. Despite continuing to work together, the end of their marriage weighed heavily on them, especially Agnetha, who would go on to say that she required therapy following the divorce. That's not too surprising, as they continued to work together for many years after the end of their marriage. And being forced to work with someone you despise, well, that doesn't exactly sound like a healthy dynamic. But even with those glaring cracks in the group's persona, their divorce may have further contributed to ABBA's success. Not long after their split, Bjorn turned his heartbreak into a major win. He wrote a song that would become a huge hit, "The Winner Takes It All." There are mixed stories about how much of this was about their divorce, with some sources saying it is and others saying it isn't. Either way, Agnetha found herself forced to sing about lost love shortly following her own experience of it. But her response to the song itself wasn't what you might think. The true misconception about "the winner takes it all" is the belief that Agnetha felt like the loser in a situation. In reality, she admitted that she was enjoying singing and sharing that song with the public. Looking back at that time, she said, "I didn't mind sharing it with the public. It didn't feel wrong. There is so much in that song. It was a mixture of what I felt and what Bjorn felt, but also what Benny and Frida went through." So the end of their marriage didn't officially break up the group, but a more lethal opponent loomed on the horizon. Shortly after the divorce, another scary event nearly knocked the wind out of Agnetha. During an American tour in 1979, the band boarded a short domestic flight. The trip from New York to Boston should have been simple, except for the tornado that forced them to make an emergency landing. They cancelled their performance, and Agnetha avoided planes from that point on, putting an additional strain on the band and its ability to tour. But even as tensions grew within the group, they fought to keep the dream alive for as long as they possibly could. They ended up releasing 2 more albums after the divorce. While critics applauded the more nuanced and emotional tone ABBA's later albums carried, their popularity started to wane as they crept into the 80s. With tension within the group mounting, ABBA couldn't hold on forever, and neither could the last couple standing. Benny and Frida's marriage was in trouble. Although they didn't announce their divorce until 1981, they reportedly separated the year prior. Benny had already met another woman, whom he married less than a year after filing for divorce. But this was another blow that they would really struggle to come back from. It was the beginning of the end of ABBA. In December of 1982, the band performed on the Late Late Breakfast show in the UK via transmission. This was their last performance. They never made an official announcement declaring their intention to break up, but they all went their separate ways following this point. Although the members of ABBA occasionally met up in social settings, performing the odd time in fractured groupings, they didn't perform together as a foursome for decades. The release of the popular musical Mamma Mia based on their songs kept them relevant, but the group was done. Fans had truly given up hope. In the year 2000, amid a revival of several of their hits, an American-British consortium offered the group $1 billion to reunite for 100 shows, but they declined the offer. To put that into perspective, the group was offered more than the value of 25 different Major League Baseball teams and the GDPs of some countries. That's potentially $250 million that each member of the group refused. Benny simply said, "It's a hell of a lot of money to say no to, but we decided that it wasn't for us." And it just seemed like that was that. Years went by. And then, in 2016, the impossible happened. ABBA announced a new project. They had always insisted that a reunion would be impossible, primarily because they feared becoming a cover band for their own music. Their 2016 announcement changed this. They were to work on a new digital experience that would project their lifelike avatar forms. They called these their avatars. This was originally set to be released in 2019, but it experienced delays. Yet ABBA still had something more up their sleeves. After creating a large media hype through mysterious advertising, they announced in 2021 that they would be releasing another album. Their first album in 40 years. They also released 3 singles at the time. In May of 2022, they released ABBA Voyage alongside a concert residency in London using the avatars. The band had stated that this will be the last work they release, but Agnetha has also stated that it's up to the boys. So perhaps there's still hope. Even after all this time, there is nothing that people would love more than to see ABBA back together again like it was the old days. The chances that ABBA will come together again are unlikely, despite the odd member suggesting that they're open to it, but that doesn't mean that they've left their fans with nothing. ABBA has become an ingrained part of Western society. Through musical adaptations and covers of their songs, the band continues to exist, drawing younger generations of fans into their world. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.